When you hear the word heaven, what comes to mind? I think for a lot of us, maybe we picture either maybe our perfect day being lived over and over again, being in our perfect place with all of our favorite people and all of our favorite things. Or maybe even you picture some of the classic things that we hear about pearly gates and golden streets and houses with many rooms. The crazy part for me is that heaven is so much less about what it is and more about who is there. We're talking about heaven with students right now, and we're spending some time in the book of Revelation, which is maybe not a place where we're spending a lot of our devotional time. It's a book packed with so much symbolic history of the Old Testament and so many images that can feel so confusing as we look at John's vision that God gives him of heaven to come one day. But a passage of this struck me this week that I want to challenge and encourage you with, that in Revelation 21, John is seeing this new heaven and this new earth as God gives him this vision. And one phrase in particular stuck out to me. It says this: "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He'll wipe every tear from their eyes. There'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.'" So much to unpack here about the heaven that is to come, but there's two things that I want us to notice. One is this phrase that it says, the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. See, one of the things I want us to notice about heaven is that heaven's trajectory has always been coming down to us. For so many of us, we spend so much of life trying to ascend to something, but we have to acknowledge the fact that there was no ascent we could ever make to get to heaven, but that heaven came down to us. And that really God's trajectory has always been towards his people. What makes heaven great is that God is there. And we were made for God. And so that's what makes heaven so good for us, is to be with the presence of God, with no more crying, no more mourning, no more death. But as we look at this again, we see that God's dwelling place is now among his people, and he will dwell with them. That was always the goal. It was how it was meant to be in Eden. And we see that even after we broke it, that God was walking in the garden, and he said, "Where are you?" to Adam and Eve. And then we see that throughout the Old Testament, his presence would go from being on a mountaintop to then being in the Ark of the Covenant carried around the tabernacle to then eventually in the temple in Jerusalem. And then ultimately we see heaven coming down in the person of Jesus. And that because of Jesus' victory on the cross, we now as believers have access to his Spirit dwelling within us. His trajectory has always been towards us. It has always been about getting heaven to us. But I wonder, as we look at our response to his trajectory being towards his people, is our trajectory towards him? And so my challenge to you today is this: to one, thank God for the fact that he has always moved first. He has always moved first towards us, and he is continuing to move towards us today, because his desire is to be our God and for us to be his people as he dwells with us. And two, would you pray and ask God, turn your heart and your affections and your attentions and your trajectory towards him, knowing that it's because he's moved towards you first.